out advice on what we need every day in terms of food. She is from the Food and Nutrition Specialist Private Limited, and this is the first private nutrition consulting company established in Singapore way back in 1989. Pauline will talk to us on how we should manage our diet, and she is a very entertaining speaker. We enjoy listening to her, so please sit back and enjoy.
Thank you, Dr. Cho, for the kind introduction. I'm shaking here when I heard that you mentioned that I'm an entertaining speaker. Okay, before I start, of course, I would really like to thank the Kidney Dialysis Foundation for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about this topic, less salt, less fat, a heart and kidney-friendly diet. With all of you. And once again, we would really like to thank you for spending your precious Saturday afternoon, with all of us. When Dr. Lee told me that the topic is less salt and less fat, I actually asked myself, okay, I must have spoken on this topic many, many times. In fact, I think I can spend the whole afternoon standing here just to talk to you about fat and salt. But I know I only got 30 minutes. So since I have only 30 minutes, I must think carefully, what do I want to share with you? Those must be very important information. So I asked myself, what should I start? I think it's only fair for me to start with telling you why we keep telling you, we nutritionists or the doctors, always tell you to cut down salt and cut down fat. Because if you are not convinced, if I'm not explaining to you why, then I think very unlikely that you are willing to listen to me and you are not willing to go and make all the changes that I will ask you to do. Okay, so I will start with telling you why. I think you have never heard nutritionists or doctors telling you to cut down fiber or to cut down calcium or to cut down iron, Why? Why only cut down salt, cut down fat? Maybe sometimes they'll tell you cut down sugar, cut down calories, but nobody's asking to cut down fiber. Nobody's asking to cut down calcium. Why? Because those are very important nutrients, and most Singaporeans do not have enough fiber. We do not have enough calcium. So that's why we never tell you to cut down. But for fat, for sodium or salt, that's a different story. Those are important nutrients as well. Those are essential nutrients. You must have some in your food. You must have some in your diet. But the problem is we are eating too much. And unfortunately, if you are eating too much fat, eating too much sodium or salt, that would actually affect our health in a very negative way. I think during the last 1.5 hours, you have heard Dr. Lee, Dr. Tan, and Dr. Jimmy explain to you those alarming diseases. For example, the diabetes, the kidney disease, the heart disease. Okay, those are the diseases that we really don't want to have. To be honest with you, I think all of us, who come to this forum, really are very concerned about our health. We don't really want to end up with those diseases. But unfortunately, if your diet is full of fat, full of salt, full of sodium, well, your risk of having those diseases will be higher. Let me tell you why, and let me share with you how that would affect our health. If you are eating a lot of fat, it doesn't matter what kinds of fat, okay? Whether it's the saturated or the unsaturated fat, if you eat a lot, you will definitely become bigger, okay? I know a lot of us want to become bigger. I also want to become taller, okay? But when I say you become bigger, I'm talking about not growing taller this way, but growing bigger this way. Because most of the time, if you eat a lot of fat, then your food will be very high in calories. And if you eat a lot of calories, definitely you will gain weight. And you become overweight, and some of you probably will become what we call obese. It means that you really are very big. So what's wrong with being big? I really like to become big. I'm quite comfortable with my weight. I'm okay. I think I look good. But the problem is, if you are obese or if you are overweight, then the risk of having those chronic diseases like your heart disease, your cardiovascular disease, your stroke, the risk of having diabetes, hypertension, or even certain kinds of cancer will be higher. And just now you also heard from Dr. Cho and Dr. Grace Lee that if you have diabetes, if you have high blood pressure, then definitely your risk of having kidney disease will be higher. If I'm not mistaken, Dr. Lee, you mentioned that I think 60% of the dialysis patient or patients with kidney problems are due to diabetes and also high blood pressure, hypertension. So that is why it's important that we should control our fat intake so we don't become too big, okay, or don't become overweight or obese. On the other hand, we also know that if your intake of fat is high, especially the wrong kind of fat, like the saturated fat, it will actually increase our cholesterol. Okay, so if you have very high cholesterol, definitely the risk will be higher of having heart problem will be slightly higher when compared with somebody who doesn't have high cholesterol. Okay, so now move on to sodium. What's wrong with sodium, or what's wrong with so-called salt? The problem with sodium is because a lot of studies show that if you take in a lot of sodium, you take in a lot of salt, especially for individuals, okay, for some of us who are considered as sodium sensitive. That affects about 10 to 15% of the population. For those people who are very sensitive to sodium, if your intake of sodium is high, then the risk of getting high blood pressure will be high. High blood pressure, I think, mentioned by the previous speakers, is what we call a silent killer. If you don't go for screening, you don't go and see your GP, you never check your blood pressure, you will not know that you have high blood pressure. And when you find out that you have hypertension, it might be too late. It might be in the end stage. It's difficult to control already, and you have to start taking medication. So it's very important that when you find out that you have high blood pressure, you start controlling. Because if you don't control your blood pressure, then the risk of having or the risk of getting kidney diseases will be high. So it's also very important that you control your sodium. I will tell you how much is okay and how much is not okay. Okay, so let's focus on cutting down the salt, cutting down the fat, so we can become healthier. Now, let's talk about fat. How many of you know what fat is? What is fat? I think I have a lot of patients who complain to me. They always feel that we nutritionists are not very fair. We are not very fair because we always talk about fat as something that's really bad. I agree sometimes with them, I think we are not really very fair, for fat. Because fat is actually an essential nutrient. It's very important. We must have some, Can you imagine if you don't use oil to cook, to stir fry your vegetables? What would happen to your dish? Can you stir fry vegetables without oil? I think we can try, but I think nobody would eat a plate of stir-fried vegetables because oil gives us the taste, they give us the mouthfeel, they give us the flavor, they give us the aroma. We must have some fat in the diet, but the problem is we shouldn't have too much, okay? Because it gives you a lot of calories. As I mentioned earlier, we only have 3 nutrients that will give us calories, what we call the CPF. We all have CPF account. Okay, we have money in the CPF. But here for us nutritionists, when we talk about CPF, we don't mean the usual CPF. We are talking about the carbohydrates, the protein, and fat. They give us the calories. But compared with carbo and protein, fat actually gives you more calories. Okay, so if you eat a lot, then definitely it will increase weight. So that is why you have to be careful. But you must have some fat. You must have what we call the essential fat. Because without essential fat, you will not become healthy. I'll tell you a little bit more about essential fats later. Now, when you look at fat, there are actually what we call 2 different types of fat. I think you probably have heard this a few times, for those who are, for those of you who have been to a lot of public forums and, who are really very into health, you probably know that, we have 2 different families of fat, the so-called saturated fats and the unsaturated fats. Let's look at saturated fats. The saturated fats are usually come from the animal sources, from the animal families, and they are not considered as the good ones. They are actually our biggest enemy because they tend to increase the cholesterol level. So where do we find saturated fat? Animal fat, your chicken skin, your butter, your lard, your ghee, and so on and so forth. When you look at the other family, which is the unsaturated fat, we can actually further classify them into 2 different groups. One is what we call the monounsaturated fat. The other one is polyunsaturated fat. If you take those 2 kinds of fats in moderation, which means you don't go and drink your bottle of oil, okay? You take them in moderation, okay? You just the right amount. So let's look at the bad one, the saturated fat. Can you find them? The animal sources, as I mentioned earlier, from your chicken fat, from your chicken skin, from your fatty meats, especially I think for a lot of the Chinese, in Singaporeans, we love to eat what? 三层肉, belly pork. So those are really very high in saturated fat. The butter, the ghee, okay, and even the coffee creamer. Normally when I explain to my audience about coffee creamer, they would all like stunned and look at me and say, huh? Coffee creamer? Isn't like milk powder? I thought that is milk powder. The coffee creamer, the non-dairy coffee creamer, is not milk powder. It's a white color powder which looks like milk powder, but it's not. Can anybody tell me what that is? That white powder that you are adding into your coffee. What is coffee creamer? Ah, we have a very smart participant here. What is that? Palm oil. Can you imagine your coffee creamer, okay, which you think that is full of calcium because you think that is milk powder, is actually made from palm oil. So imagine every time you add that very naive looking creamer into your coffee, thinking that you are adding calcium, you are actually like pouring oil into your coffee. Which one of us want to go and add oil into our coffee? None. But we are actually doing that every day, without realizing it. Okay, so be careful. Now, nutritionists always tell you, especially to the ladies, drink milk. It's very important to drink milk because it prevents osteoporosis, it helps you to strengthen your bones. Yes, but we always tell you to drink low-fat milk. Why? Because if you are drinking full cream milk, it's actually quite high in fat. And the kind of fat that you can find in full cream dairy products, including your full cream milk, including your favorite ice cream, your cheese, are actually what we call the saturated fat. Because dairy products come from where? Animals come from the cows. Cow is an animal. So that's why you have to watch out. Drink milk, but drink the right kind of milk. Drink the low-fat milk. Now, as I mentioned earlier, most of the saturated fats come from animal sources, but there are two very special plant-based saturated fats that I want to highlight to you today. The first one is palm oil, and the second one is what we call the coconut oil, or the fat that you get from coconut milk or coconut cream. The reason why I want to highlight these two groups of saturated plant-based saturated fat with you today is because we Singaporeans just love to have anything that has coconut milk inside. Whether it's your laksa, your lontong, your dessert, your kueh, they are all full of coconut milk or coconut cream. Don't forget, they are very high in saturated fat. Okay, so remember, even though coconut milk does not have any cholesterol, but they are very high in saturated fat, which also help to increase your blood cholesterol. So that is something that you should control. Now look at palm oil. How many of you can tell me that they are using palm oil for cooking at home? How many of you is using palm oil to cook at home? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. I don't see any hands. So does it mean that you guys don't use palm oil to cook at all? All very healthy, right? But statistics show something else. It actually shows that majority of Singaporeans use palm oil to cook at home. How's that so? What oil do you use at home? Wow. Okay, very healthy and rich group of people here. Okay, olive oil. Besides olive oil, what else? Canola oil. Okay, but how many of you use something called vegetable oil to cook at home? Vegetable oil. I have one uncle telling me, yeah, I use vegetable oil. Or something called cooking oil, salad oil. Okay, go back. If those who are using vegetable oil or cooking oil, for cooking, please go back to your kitchen, take out the bottle, flip over and check the ingredients list and find out what is actually inside my vegetable oil. When they call themselves vegetable oil, which vegetable do they come from? Chai sum, gailan, carrots, long beans. What veggie? It's veggie, right? So you must tell me which veggie. But you'll be so surprised if you go and look at the ingredients list, because they will tell you, my so-called vegetable oil is actually palm oil. Okay, so for those who are using palm oil, you may really want to consider, changing to a different kind of oil. So change to what kind of cooking oil? You can change to either mallow or polyunsaturated fat, which means that you can change to the olive oil, you can change to canola oil, you can change to peanut oil, you can even change to soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil. Just now, I think Dr. Chong talked about the sunflower oil, so you can